Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, we're going to get right back into our Operator's Research Manual. But before we do that, I had a couple of conversations this week with some young people that I found very interesting. And before I get into that, I'd like to just jump on some quick information here. Yesterday, Facebook stock dropped by 25%, which equals into a $16 billion loss for Zuckerberg. I haven't discovered why the drop, the sudden drop in their stock. I don't know if it was a policy that they came out with, but it did red flag that there is something going on there. Anyway, Facebook's stock's down by 25%. As I said, it lost to Zuckerberg of 16B. That's B Bravo dollars. Okay, another interesting thing that we find out is that the Justice Department is now in control and possession of over 700,000 emails from Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein. Now, folks, and when I first read this, I thought it was erroneous, the number, 700,000. I thought maybe they had, 70,000. So I went to some sources that I trust, and no, it was correct. 700,000 emails from Harvey Weinstein. And supposedly included in this was a copy of the 33,000 missing Hillary Clinton emails. Now, I say all they had to do if they really wanted the 33,000 missing Hillary Clinton emails is they could have got it from the NSA because they copy and categorize every single communication in this country. And also, they could have asked the Chinese. I'm sure the Chinese could have used it as a bargaining chip with negotiations to what's going on now. But they could have asked the Chinese for the 33,000 missing Hillary Clinton emails because they've openly said they have them, okay? So anyway, what they're finding out, folks, is some major pedophilia practices, and they've also gotten deeper into the people and the personalities and financing behind the sex slave trade of children. Now, I mind you that the only thing I am happy with the Justice Department so far, excuse me, is how they've been really going after the pedophilia and the sex rings, not just here in the United States, but basically throughout the world, because it is globally connected. The slave trade is part of the elite world, my friends. And as I reported to you, particularly in Colorado, they actually found children in cages being transported, and if I remember right, they found children as old as 14 and as young as 6 months old that were being captured and or sold in the sex trade, the global sex trade of the elite. So I'm hoping that more of this information that they dig into, they'll have addresses, they'll have communications and so forth, that the Justice Department will continue in that practice, and I applaud President Trump and Jeff Sessions for all their actions on that. The other thing, my friends, is that very interestingly, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've been getting information that there are 40,000 sealed indictments that the Justice Department has put together. At first, I was a little skeptical of this information. But I have since gone to sources that I look for to confirm information. I never confirm things on speculation or on one source. I like multiple sources, and they have to be at least 3 sources that I have found in the past to be reputable and credible. So these sources have presented this information independently of each other, and I am beginning to believe that yes, there are 40,000 sealed indictments ready to be presented to grand juries and so forth. And I would hope that some of these sealed indictments have some very big and recognizable names attached to them. Okay, that was just what I wanted to get into real quick, my friends. So I want to also, that was part of a conversation I had with a group of young people. But the big thing I wanted to get into about the conversation was one of the young people that I was speaking with flat out said to me, said, "Tom, boy, you must be a Republican." And I was sort of taken back by that because I am not a Republican. I am not a Democrat. I select my candidate individually by their actions, by their history, who they're allied with, and also who their enemies are. So I never, ever vote by party affiliation. Never. I have never hit the lever for one party affiliation in my life. You ever notice people that got a lot of bumper stickers or they have, banners in their yards, that they're always one side of the set-up divide paradigm? And you have to understand, my friends, that these people are victims of the indoctrination system because they can't think outside the divide paradigm, the borders that have been set up around them mentally to see beyond what these parties actually represent and what they really are. So when I told this young man, actually there was a group of them, but when I told this particular young man that I vote independently and blah, 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 he asked me, well, if you do that, what are some of the criteria that you're looking at? And we got into a lot of things. It was a great conversation. So then, hindsight of our conversation, I decided to, what did some of our founding fathers think was going to be a quality person for a candidate to represent the people and to carry out the laws and so forth? So I found some interesting quotes, and I wanted to put together, I've actually got this book at my church, and I thank my pastor for getting it, but it's called Your 5 Duties as a Christian Citizen, and they cover a lot about what, as a citizen of this country, what the foundations were that the people would look at to vote and select candidates. So I thought I would select some of these names that you should recognize. And let me see, I just made some quick notes here to make sure I don't miss any of them, because there's quite a few in here, folks. It's a great booklet. And if your church does not have this, I'm not selling anything here. This is for purely informational purposes, but it's called Your 5 Duties. You can see it here, hopefully, as a Christian citizen. So let's get into some of these quotes, because they're all about selecting candidates, what to look for, what to stay away from, who to pull the lever for, and what's the foundation of going through that process of selection. Now, this is from Noah Webster, and let me get, this is actually not Noah Webster, my folks, I'm sorry. This here is Lord Acton. It's a quote that we gave you last week, basically that all, it is the answer that has yet to be in the history of the world is the war between the bankers and the people. And you've got to understand, my friends, that everything that we get into here, everything, there's nothing that these bankers do not control and implement for their policies of slavery and genocide, as we've read to you in this document. Okay, so Lord Acton's quote, keep that in the back of your mind always. When there's daily events going on, when the Hegelian dialectic is being used against the people, anything. There's nothing that goes on in this world that affects our lives that is not implemented and or controlled by the international bankers. Nothing. Your school system, your churches, your TV, your entertainment, your money system, your lack of money system, your loss of rights, all of it. Trade agreements, everything is implemented by these international bankers. Let us continue. Okay, now this is Noah Webster. And I want to read this quote to you, folks. Noah Webster, education is useless without the Bible. The Bible was America's basic textbook in all fields. God's word, contained in the Bible, has furnished all necessary rules to direct our conduct. I want to summarize this in one thing. What happened to our society after 1964 when the federal government took over the education system in the United States, what's the very, very first thing they implemented? They got rid of the Bible. They got rid of prayer because they were taking us from a God-fearing, God-loving, moralistic culture through Christianity and the foundations of our laws as a country. And they took us into a secular world of everything is gray culture. There is no morals. There is no right and wrong. And this is where, look at our society. Look at the crime. Look at the failure. Look at the lack of education, of knowledge, of reasoning that our children can't even count change back, folks. They can't count change to you. They can't do it. And I'm going to explain why they can't in a minute when we get to this document. Another quote from Mr. Noah Webster. In selecting men for office, let principle be your guide. Did he say let the political affiliation party be your guide? No, let principle be your guide. Regard not the particular sect or domination of the candidate, but look to his character. It alleged by men of loose principles or of defective views of the subject that religion and morality are not necessary or important qualifications for political stations. But the scriptures teach a different doctrine. They teach that rulers should be men who rule in the fear of God, abled men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. When a citizen gives his vote to a man of known immorality, he abuses his civic responsibility. He sacrifices not only his own interest, but that of his neighbor, and he betrays the interest of his country. Absolutely true. Okay, what did Mark Twain have to say on this subject? Mr. Mark Twain said, a Christian's first duty is to God. What? He didn't say a Christian's first duty is to the political affiliation. He didn't say his first duty is to the flag. No. His first duty is to God, not the government. It then follows as a matter of course that it is his duty to carry his Christian code of morals to the polls and vote them. Now, folks, old Samuel Clemens, I know you know him as Mark Twain, but old Samuel Clemens, a lot of people have written that, he had, different monkeys on his back, we'll say. And the man, when you really study him, did not. And he was a brilliant wordsmith. But he had a moral foundation. And he believed in the foundation, in the laws of our nation. Let us continue. If Christians should vote their duty to God at the polls, they would carry every election and do it with ease. It would bring about a moral revolution that would incalculably be beneficial. It would save our country. Okay. Now, let us continue. John Jay. John Jay was the first Supreme Court Chief Justice. Brilliant man. Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Okay. So I'm going to skip here for the sake of time, and I want to go back to Mr. Noah Webster. When you become entitled to exercise the right of voting for public officers, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God. The preservation of a Republican government. Let's stop right there. The preservation of a what? A Republican government? Not a democracy? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the fill in the blank for which it stands. The Republic. All equal under law. Let us continue. The preservation of a Republican government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good so much as for selfish or local purposes. Corrupt and incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws. The public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated and discarded. If a Republican government fails to secure the public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer the laws. Has not every single prediction and observation that Noah Webster made about what would happen to our Republican form of government if the people, one, didn't vote, which is, 65% of the people don't vote? Folks, by not voting, guess what? You're voting. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? By not voting, you are voting. By not participating. The government will soon be corrupted. They will place unprincipled men in office. Laws will be made not for the public good, but so much as for selfish or local purposes. Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws, and the public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men. The rights of the citizens will be violated and discarded. Think of that. Every single observation Mr. Noah Webster made, because of our neglect to elect principled men and women based on morality and Christian faith and knowledge. Folks, you may not believe in Christianity. You may not believe in the Bible. But what is laid out in the Bible is a guideline for society. Do you remember when we presented to you the documentary Monumental? And if you missed them 3 shows, folks, please, please, please go on the internet and punch in Monumental. And it's a well-done documentary, and it basically gets into a sculpture that is in Plymouth, Massachusetts, that if you're ever there, you've got to go see it. It's absolutely remarkable. It's beautiful. The craftsmanship is unbelievable. But what it is a sequence of statues that are into one that are a recipe, if you would, that was founded by the Pilgrims for the good of how to manage a society. It's phenomenal. Go look that up on the internet. You will absolutely enjoy it, and you will also enjoy some history of the separatists that you know as the Pilgrims that basically formatted this whole thing. And in this documentary, they get into some history that I think you'll be very, very impressed with. Very well done documentary. For knowledgeable reasons, please go and watch it. But back to the foundation that Noah Webster and others were talking about is that the reason our country is in the mess that it is in, and it is in a terrible mess, folks, terrible, is because we have gone astray of our duties as citizens. So, one more quote for you to read to you. Edmund Burke. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And that's what's taken place in our country. Okay, let's get into Mr. Huxley. This guy was brilliant, and he took a lot of his writings and put them in books, yes, but he also was a lot of his writings that the planners of society, the social engineers, still use today. Mr. Huxley, By means of ever more effective methods of mind manipulation, the democracies will change their nature. The quaint old forms, elections, parliaments, Supreme Courts, and all the rest will remain. The underlying substance will be a new kind of totalitarianism. All the traditional names, all the hallowed slogans will remain exactly what they were in the good old days. Democracy and freedom will be the theme of every broadcast and editorial. Meanwhile, the ruling oligarchy and its highly trained elite of soldiers, policemen, thought manufacturers, and mind manipulators will quietly run the show as they see fit. That's what this document's about, folks. One more from Mr. Huxley. The perfect dictatorship would have the appearance of a democracy, but would basically be a prison without walls, in which the prisoners would not even dream of escaping. It would essentially be a system of slavery where, through the consumption and entertainment, the slaves would love their servitudes. Is that not what this document's about, folks? Let us go on with Mr. Leo Tolstoy. The essence of all slavery consists in the taking the product of another's labor by force. It is immaterial whether this force be ownership founded upon the ownership of the slave or ownership of the money that he must get to live. Okay, let's get back into, I'm going to leave this one up, folks, while we are studying this. Let's get into Operator's Research Technical Manual, Tango, Michael, Dash, Sierra Whiskey, 7905.1. Okay. I'm just going to get into this one statement, and then we're going to drop off continue right where we dropped off last week. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of social automation system, the silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or groups of persons in a position of great power and without the full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. It's where we are today. Okay, we had got into a lot about this document, and now we are studying the short list of outputs. And we got into outputs. And I'm just going to, we went, I believe, to number 6, and we're going to just read these out, then we'll stop breaking this down again. Short list of outputs. Outputs. Create controlled situations. Manipulation of the economy, hence society. Control by control of compensation and income. The sequence. 1, it allocates opportunities. 2, it destroys opportunities. 3, it controls the economic environment. 4, controls the availability of raw materials. 5, it controls capital. And this is where we left off last week. 6, controls bank notes. That's what you base your life on. How many of these debt instruments that you're the co-surety to, that your mother signed off in a document called the birth certificate to make you the co-surety to this control of the bank notes? And you say, well, what does that have to do with my dollars in my pocket? It has everything to do with it, my friends, because you do not have a dollar in your pocket. You have a Federal Reserve Bank note, Federal Reserve Private For-Profit Banking Corporation. The name was put in deceitfully, as you know, because you watch this program and you study. by a gentleman by the name of Paul Warburg. Some people pronounce it Warburg. In his German, it's Warburg. And they knew what they were going to do when they met at Jekyll Island, as we've read to you many, many times. And the 6 things they wanted to do. Well, what was the last one they wanted to do? When the system failed, how to bring the burden of the debt upon the citizenry of the United States. Number 6. Number 1 was to take over the issuance of the currency. And what did history through Amschel Rothschild tell us about this? Once you control the currency, give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. So anytime you see the word note, understand, my friends, it is an acknowledgement of debt, and there is an interest bond due on that debt, and that puts us in a state of perpetual debt. This is why we are the slaves of the oligarchy that Mr. Huxley is speaking of here. Through the control of the issuance of the currency. Because through that, my friends, they control everything. Everything. There is nothing, zero, that these bankers physically do not control through the issuance of the currency. And wars and wars and millions of people have suffered over the battle that Lord, through wars, implemented through lies by the oligarchy to get the poor of one nation to be convinced they got to go kill the poor of another nation for their profit, so they can create and control the bank notes. My friends, when they read the 7 countries they were going to invade, what was the common denominator? Libya, Iraq, Syria, Iran. What was it? They were going outside the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the bank, they were going to lose control internationally of what? The bank notes. Because Iran and Syria and Iraq at the time and Libya were no longer using just bank notes through the Bretton Woods Agreement. You know it as the dollar. You've heard it called the petrodollar. Understand that. That is the fulcrum of their control. Let us continue. Now, we're going to start anew. This is what we've covered. Now we're going to start from last week. Number 7, controls the inflation of the currency. Hugely important. And I know we started to touch on this at the end of the program last year. Folks, inflation, people don't understand, especially Americans, because they'll never teach you this. They'll never teach you this in the public fool system that we pay a very high price for. Inflation is a measurement of the loss or the loss of the purchasing power of a medium of exchange. Now we know through the Federal Reserve's own statements and charts that the dollar has, since they took on over control, the dollar, has lost 98% of its purchasing power as compared to the degree and level of purchasing power that was available to the medium of exchange when they took it over on December 21st, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas break. So we all know, like I've said before, that when I was a young lad, I used to pump gas on Sunday morning. I worked from 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. I got paid $2. Now, folks, the thing was, and you may say, boy, you got ripped off. Well, folks, in 1964, there was still some silver backing our money. That's no longer happening. That's why we don't have silver coins anymore. Dollars, half dollars, quarters, and dimes. Yeah, they were silver, folks. They were real silver. You can go to a pawn shop or a coin shop and you can buy them and pay a hefty price for them, and they're a great investment. You know, you may now spend, whatever, $3 for a silver dime. That's right. Why? Because that dime has intrinsic value. It has silver, real value, real recognized intrinsic value. That dollar, that banknote, which has lost 98% of its purchasing power, is going to take, say, 3 of them to buy that one 10-cent piece that has the silver. So when I was working for $2 for 6 hours, well, in a kid's economy, if you would, I was never into chocolate. I'm not into it today. But a candy bar in 1964 and 65 was 5 cents or a dime. Today, that same candy bar is $1.50, $2. Has the candy bar changed? No. The purchasing power of the medium of exchange has changed. It's been reduced. That's why we pay more now. Folks, my mother and father bought a house in 1964 for $14,000. I'm not so certain you could buy a decent vehicle for that money right now. It's nothing now for people to spend $30,000, $60,000 on a vehicle. That's why they went to lease programs, because if you were buying it straight out, you couldn't afford the monthly note in acknowledgement of debt. And while we're talking about this, remember we got into it a little bit last week about the MCO with cars. Why is it we don't own anything? Well, we know from Senate Document 43 that all property is in the state and subordinate to the necessities of the state. We've read that to you many, many times. Again, because they control the issuance of the banknotes. But what they've done, my friends, with the states, because that car, that vehicle has what? It has real value. It does. It's a means of transportation. It's an intrinsic valued commodity, if you would. So the state receives a document called the MCO, Manufacturer's Certification of Origination. In other words, there comes a title with that vehicle that goes to the state of fill in the blank, and then the state of fill in the blank puts that on their books as an asset, and then cuts you a what? A certificate of title. Certificate. It means it's a negotiable instrument. It holds value, and someone is allowing you to use that entity, whatever it may be. Your perceived property, your perceived car, your perceived house, your perceived child. Birth certificate, certificate of title. And if you're watching this show for the first time and you don't believe me, I invite you to go and get your title for your property, your certificate of title for your property, and you will see that you are a tenant in common, or a joint tenant. But either way, my friends, that's the only 3 that you are allowed to be under the system, because you don't own it. You are merely getting a certificate of title, bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use something of wealth, of equity, of value. And that's why they issue it to you. And if you look at your plate, I don't care what state you're from, and you have to look at your license plate, and you got to put it in the sun just right to see this, because they don't want you to see this. But Vermont has a station green background plate with white lettering print. What you can see it better in the Vermont state plate, because they don't want you to see this, folks. But if you take your license plate and you just play with it in the sun a little bit, and right in the center of it, you will see a series of a print and then a circle, and print and then a circle. It's about maybe 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches in circumference. You got to look for it. And the light conditions got to be just right. Well, folks, that is an endorsement. Like you endorsing a check, your signature is endorsing a check. That is an endorsement from the people who really own that vehicle. State of fill in the blank. That's who owns it. And they put it on their books as an asset. And they give you permission to use it as long as you pay their fees. And then you put yourself under their commercial venue of law. You see, when you take out your registration, and the trooper or the police officer, most of them don't know this, folks. All they know is you got to have this. Well, they don't know that with that, when you present it, you are acknowledging that you are under a commercial venue of law. That's why they don't want you traveling without it. Jurisprudence says you have the right to travel on the public roads as long as you pay the fees, which we pay many for. You buy a gallon of gas, buy a tire, buy a car part, buy a quart of oil, buy a filter. I don't care, buy a tire, what you're paying, what you're buying. You're paying for road usage fees as you should to maintain the roads. Makes sense, doesn't it? So why do we have to pay all these fees in some states annually on sales tax and all these things for cars? Permit fees. Why do I need a license? License to be given permission which would otherwise be unpermissionable. You know, the first license that was issued was for people to marry from different religions and cultures because they had to get permission to do it. It comes from the French word laisser. License to be given permission to which would otherwise be unpermissionable. So why do I need a license to freely travel? Because you're not free, folks. That's why. You are the slave that Mr. Huxley and so many others have written and spoke of, and plans implemented to create this environment. And this manual is their modus operandi. So let's get back into it. Controls the inflation of the currency. So important. So important. And if you don't think it is, my friends, look what's going on in Venezuela. Look what went on in Zimbabwe. All these different countries. Look what went on in the United States in our history. Okay, let us continue. Number 8, controls the possession of property. Senate Document 43. All property is in the state and is subordinate to the necessities of the state. Do you think they control the possession of property? Your children are bonded as a co-surety to their facade debt. Do you think they're in possession of property? Human resources? Have you ever heard that term? If you work in any big corporation, we all know about human resources. Controls industrial capacity. Absolutely. Look what happened to the South during the Civil War, the war between the states, the war of northern aggression, whatever you want to call it. The Rothschilds, Hampshire Rothschild Bank out of London, financed the North. And James Rothschild out of Paris, France, financed the South. When they didn't expect the South to do so well militarily, they ceased to finance, give credit to the South. The currency collapsed, and what little industry was in the South at that point completely collapsed. Who won the Civil War, folks? Cui bono. Who benefited? Wasn't the black man, because all they did at the end of it was take the black people from what little there was. I know 4.5%, depending who you study, between 4.5% and 6% of the people in the country Yes, there was slavery in the North. As a matter of fact, look it up. Grant kept his slaves after the Civil War and actually said, and I give you this quote, that cheap, good labor was hard to find. Look it up. Grant keeps slaves after the Civil War. But who won the Civil War? Key bono. Who benefited? It wasn't the black people, because they took the black people from the private plantation and put everybody on the government plantation with the 14th Amendment. So it wasn't the people. All the dying, all the suffering, all the disease, the rape of the South, all of it wasn't the people. Did the North? What was their benefit? They lost thousands of their men. What was their benefit? There was none to them. What was the benefit of Washington, D.C. when everybody went on the federalized plantation? Oh, big benefit. What was the benefit of the international bankers? Wonderful benefit. Because they put the federal government into a state of perpetual debt. That's why they killed Lincoln. Folks, when the bankers, through the control of the issuance of the currency through credit, went to Lincoln, because the Civil War, they got to supplement the hardware of war, right? So what they did was they went to Lincoln and they said that basically we're going to give you credit, but we're going to put it at a 24% interest. Well, Lincoln came out with a thing called that became known as the greenback. And what he did is he just issued script like we use today. This was government script, non-interest bearing. What do we have today? Private, for-profit banking script with interest bearing. So if you have one Federal Reserve note and you got interest due on it and you create another one, well, now you've just doubled the debt, haven't you? Because now you've got to, you take this one you created to cover this interest, well, now you've got to take two to create the one you just created. Then it quadruples, it folds and folds and folds. It's perpetual debt. It was set up that way. Well, Lincoln finally said, I'm done, I'm not doing it. And his famous statement was that, I have the Confederate Army in my front yard and the international bankers in my backyard, and for the sake and future of my nation, it is the international bankers I fear the most. What did Jefferson say to us? That he thought that the international bankers, he feared the international bankers more than he did standing armies for the future of our country. Jackson, the last time this government ran without a debt, folks, was the Andrew Jackson presidency. Since the Civil War on, it's been perpetual debt by the issuance of the control of the currency. And they are in charge of all the property and all the industrial capacity. And number 10, controls manufacturing. Well, of course it does. Because we already read in number 4, it controls the availability of raw materials. Number 3, it controls the economic environment. Number 2, it destroys economic opportunities. Number 1, it allocates economic opportunities. And number 9, we know that it controls industrial capacity. So, of course, it controls manufacturing. Number 11, it controls the availability of goods, commodities. Heinz Kissinger, if you wish to control food, control a nation. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Control food, control the people. My apologies. Control oil, control nations. See, just by controlling them two commodities. And what was the young lady when we were in Mogadishu, Somalia? When the UN was in there bringing food and they found out that the UN was actually working with the warlords to control the food, and there was paybacks and there was sex trade. Oh my God, terrible. We reported all that to you. So what did they do? That, I forget the woman's name, but she said that food is power and we make no apologies for it. So if you're controlling all the commodities, and food is a commodity, folks, water is a commodity, oil, all of this. Of course, you can control, if you can have the control of all these things, you can control any nation with it by behind the scenes controlling these goods, these commodities. Makes perfect sense. Number 12, controls the price of such commodities. Is the price of steel so expensive that it's going to drive infrastructure budgets on highways and bridges and automobiles and ships and everything where there's steel, trucking, everything? Is that going to drive the price of it through the roof? That's called inflation, isn't it? Because it's going to take more of these indebted, for-profit, private bank scripts to buy that same ton of steel. So that the commodity costs more. Well, it takes more of them scripts to do it. Well, that's called inflation. Did the steel change? No. The purchasing power of the medium of exchange was reduced. Inflation. 13. Controls all services, i.e. the labor force, etc. Of course it does. It's going to control it right down to how much they can give you because we're paying taxes, we're paying too much for that steel I just discussed, how many people I can hire, can I actually produce, can I get the raw materials to produce, and so forth. So naturally it controls the labor force. Number 14, controls payments to government officials. You like the way they worded that? Controls payments to government officials. Why do you think that's so important? Why? Can you say bribery? Can you say extortion? This is why. This is why. Folks, people who work in government, and I'm talking about administratively here, because there are some great people in government that really join, like some police forces and some, even though I'm against the federal government being involved in law enforcement because it has no authority to, it can only be law enforcement in enclaves, territories, and districts. And I've read this to you before. Well, what did they do? They made every state a district under this commercial law system. Yes, my friends, there is a state of Vermont and there is a district of Vermont. District of fill in the blank. And that's how they got the federal government into all the states, by the use of language. Remember the word code, taken from the Latin word coda, to be altered secretly. That's how they got the federal government into our backyards. And they've broken down the borders with things like, let me see, oh, I got one for you. Pollution doesn't recognize borders. Hence, well, we got the EPA. And every state's got their own little version of the EPA, and they don't recognize your borders or your property rights. Why? Because you do not own it. They work for the insolvent corporation, they being all the alphabet agencies that come on your perceived property, and they work for that insolvent corporation who holds the title to land through, finally, when you get to the top of the pyramid, through the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Yes, my friends, that's who actually owns the title to your land, because the state of, district of, fill in the blank, is insolvent to the Superior Corporation, USA Incorporated, which is insolvent to the Federal Reserve Bank, which got into that position because of the superior position by the issuance of the medium of exchange. So, of course, as Amschad Rothschild said, they don't care about the laws or who's writing the laws because they control such entities. And one of their ways of doing that, my friends, is number 14, controls payments to government officials. Number 15, controls the legal functions. Now, what is functions? A function is a system of operations. So they control what? The judicial system. And we see that. Look how much the judicial system has not only covered up the crimes of, say, the Clinton Foundation or Mueller sending 20-something% of our hand delivering to the Russians our uranium. That very same guy is now investigating on a witch hunt the President of the United States for the sake of the deep state who control the legal system through the issuance of the currency known as the money system, or as I say, the lack of money system. They control it. And it's been weaponized against you and I. The legal system, folks, is a weapon against the American people, and it's not asymmetrical, it is symmetrical. And its number one thing is intimidation, to create fear. And as I say to you, the American people live in a state of fear. So this is why the Secretary of the Treasury is paid by the IMF, International Monetary Fund, which is a sub-parent corporation, my friends, of the Bank of International Settlements that I just spoke of in Basel, Switzerland. You ever notice how Switzerland is always protected? World War II completely encompassed Switzerland, but nobody went there. No warfare in Switzerland. It was off limits, folks, because that's where the bankers keep all their booty. And booty is a legal term. Gains by conquest. That's why pirates used to call their gains by conquest booty. There was old English law. So, yes, number 15, they have completely control the legal system of the United States. And they control it for a good portion of the world through the World Court and so forth. And this system is not based on common law that we had in this country, my friends. This system is based on law mercantile, commercial law. And it is controlled at a foreign entity known as the Bar Association, British Accreditation Registry. This is why attorneys torn to separate one from one's property, attorneys are called esquires, a title of British nobility, because they are sworn allegiance to and obedience to and controlled by the Bank of International Settlements in a commercial law system that is operating in our country today. So I think they've been quite successful, my friends, at controlling our legal system. My friends, as always, we're very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, to obtain knowledge, and to manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. And we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find. Can't believe